Hi everyone. Welcome to week 8, the second class of week 8. For this class, this will be our modality again. We will have another asynchronous class for today's lecture. I hope I will be able to see you again in person in the classroom. I will keep you updated about that. And again, thank you for your understanding and flexibility. Um, okay, to begin with, I would like to a little bit provide a perspective for you. So I will quickly summarize what we did during this semester. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about globalization. We talked about the first globalization, second globalization. We talked about the quantitative aspects of economic globalization, right? We said there are some defining characteristics of economic globalization, like um, international trade flows, flows about international investment. We talked about population movements. But then we began to talk about the qualitative aspect of globalization. So we talked about the cultural and political dimensions. We talked about the history of globalization, right? We said globalization is creating a huge global community that makes no one the other, right? Globalization is all about we, right? Global community is at the center of this process. And then, especially after second globalization, we said with Bretton Woods system, we began to build a big global division of labor, right? So this was the industrial dimension, the industrial division of labor that we had after Second World War. Um, and We said this industrial division of labor is not independent from one quantitative aspect. It is not independent from the commercial ties. It is not independent from international trade, right? To understand this relationship, in my last asynchronous class, I shared a quotation from Adam Smith, right? The extent of um, global division of labor is dependent on the extent of trade, right? If you can have a bigger network of commercial ties, namely if you can have a bigger and bigger trade, then this can help us to build a bigger division of labor, right? And this is important, but maybe one thing that process, right? It is also closely related to the cultural dimension of national economies or globalization, right? Because a division of labor is more than commercial ties. It is more than economics and politics, actually, right? We said in our last class, um, having a global community is important for a viable division of labor because division of labor is about um, having a healthy communication among partners that are belonging to different cultural settings, right? A communication without any barrier is important. And then we said trust is very important, a mutual understanding. This type of cultures are important. So then the industrial division of labor and the cultural aspect of globalization are simply uh, two sides of the same coin, right? They are inseparable. So I would like to make this quick summary at the beginning of our class because I would like to show you that we talked about different things, but actually everything is interconnected, right? We talked about cultural side, economic side. We talked about division of labor, global community. All these things are actually belonging to the same title for us. Okay, so after this quick review, I will share my screen so you can see today's lecture slide. Okay, I think you can see my slides. This will be our agenda for today. So today we will begin to talk about some theories on globalization that can help us to understand different characteristics and different aspects of globalization. And it will also help us to predict the future of globalization. Okay. Today, I plan to cover at least four theories. This will be world risk society, as you can understand from the title, this theory will focus on the risks of globalization that is awaiting for us. And then we will talk about the runaway world. We will talk about feasible globalization, and we will see if we will have some time for it. But if yes, we will also talk about world society theory. To prepare this presentation, I used one of the textbooks I introduced you at the beginning of the semester as a resource. So you didn't purchase this textbook. That's why I will scan and post the relevant pages on this discussion on Canvas. So you will be able to find these pages um, in a few days, or at the latest, I will do that uh, immediately when I return to Boise, and you will be able to find a more detailed discussion about these four theories. Okay, so let's begin to talk about the first theory, world risk society. So this theory is named after a book written by Ulrich Beck in 1992. Okay, this is a scholar writing on globalization, obviously. So the title of his book was Risk Society Towards a New Modernity. So you will see that, you will understand that in a minute, but Ulrich Beck's theory is a grand theory. So it includes a big discussion about the history of globalization and humankind, and it has a claim to be universal. Okay, you remember the characteristics of grand theory when we talk about Rostow's development theory, right? So there are some similarities between Beck's and Rostow's theory, at least in this regard. So it focuses on the risks created by modernism and globalization. So globalization and modernism, according to Beck, um, brought a lot of benefits, a lot of virtues, but we should not be blind to the risks associated by these two processes. Okay, so world risks theory, as I have said, is a grand theory. It is an example of a grand theory. According to Beck, we can analyze human history in three stages. First of all, we have pre-modern times. Sometimes these are called traditional period. Okay. Then we have early modernity, which more or less starts at the same time with the as the Industrial Revolution. And then there is reflexive modernity. Right now we are getting through this third stage, at least in the Western world. Okay, so let's talk about very quickly each stage. So pre-modern times or traditional society covers nearly um, everything about the human history just before the Industrial Revolution. But when Beck was talking about pre-modern times or traditional society, he was mainly talking about Europe just before the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at the European societies and nations during that time, you can see a few defining characteristics. First of all, during that time period, religion and church was very important, right? Church was the main provider of the meaning and identity with the words of Beck. So these were the main regulators of the cultural and political life, right? Um, so family was another institution. Sorry for my terrible hand right here. I'm trying to type with my iPad on the screen, which is not very easy. Sorry for my bad handwriting. Okay, family shapes the culture, um, the individuals, and it regulates the relationship among individuals. Okay, and finally, the village defined the size of the community during that time period. Okay, so this was a traditional life, right? Science, rationality, modernity was not very important during that time period. And religion, superstitions, um, traditional norms, family, and the village life was regulating everything during that time period. Okay, early modernity was different. You know this story more or less, right? So world rich society and Bex was repeating what we know about modernity and traditional society. During the early modernity period, there were some new values which were like solving the traditional values and society, right? The first one, individualism. So individuals were taking more responsibility in their life. What about religion and church? They were still important, but their power was declining in the daily life and as a political institution. Um, Speaking about political institutions, there was a new political institution which began to be more important during that time period. And you know what I am talking about. Nation states, this is nation states. Nation states became more important. And during that time, the philosophy that was providing a meaning for people's life was enlightenment. And with enlightenment, modernity, and rationalism was on the rise. Um, so, thanks to this, let me say, values, individualism, a declining power of church, the effect, the influence of nation states, enlightenment, modernity, and rationalism. Thanks to these um, values, we had also a technical development here, right? This was industrialism, industrial revolution, or so on, right? And all this technical process was managed. I'm talking about managing the technical details. It was managed by a very complicated managerial class and modern bureaucracy, right? So these were the main characteristics of early modernity. So early modernity started, as I have said, with the Industrial Revolution, and according to Beck, this process started at the beginning of 16th century. So Industrial Revolution started well before the invention of the steam engine, according to Beck. It began to be influential with all its cultural institutions as well, right? So early modernity created huge benefits and virtues, as he said, okay? But it had also some risks, some problems, and we only realized these problems with the reflective stage, which began uh, during the late 20th century, right? We began to think, we began to reflect and on these risks. Okay, so reflexive modernity is about discovering the risks of the first modernity. Now, what are the risks we face in the 21st century? I will show you a video clip in a minute. We know what the risks are. They are changing very rapidly and they show their negative effects on our daily life very rapidly. But according to Beck, we can classify them into three different groups. First of all, we have ecological risks after having like a wild industrialization during the last century. Then we have some economic risks. You know, there is a lot of fluctuations. There are a lot of economic crises, right? So these are the economic risks. And there is a risk of terrorism according to World Risk Society, right? Because political atmosphere is not very peaceful. Um, Modernity, enlightenment, rationality, uh, cold-blooded way of thinking about the international relations created some selfish nations and people. These are the source of political conflicts, and at extreme, we can have some war or at least terrorism will be on the rise according to Beck. Okay, so here we are talking about some risks of the things, of the values we usually praise, right? Think about the Enlightenment, think about the modernity, right? Usually we praise these values, we think these values are good. So that's why reflexive modernity and making an emphasis on risks of the modernity is comparatively a new process in the human life. Okay, so this is another enlightenment, actually. Okay, I mean, we experienced a rationalization, an enlightenment during 17th and 18th century, but realizing the risk of this first enlightenment is also another enlightenment, right? So according to Beck, because of that, reflexive modernity is a second rationalization process. It is a second enlightenment period. Okay, first rationalization was good, but it was very mechanic, right? It created a ration that is the ration of an engineer, right? But the second rationalization is more than that. With the first rationalization, we had progress in science, we had economic growth, we had technological advancement, right? We had material abundance. All these things are good. But reflective modernity is more about the values, about our preferences, right? So it has a strong normative dimension. It is reflective, okay? It is not only about the means, right? It is about the ends. Okay, so that's why it can be even critical to science. It can be even critical to a growth-centered approach, right? Because if we have some existential problems like ecological problems, right, then we should have a rationality which is more than the rationality of engineers, right? Engineers are in this context some like technical personalities, right? This is more than true with the bureaucracy, right? Bureaucracies are goal oriented, right? The political context provides them a goal. The goal is given, determined by the political processes, and the engineers and bureaucrats are simply trying to find the ways to reach to these goals, right? And this goal created by the political atmosphere, political context, was the goals of the first rationalization, right? But during second rationalization, we realized that we should question that, right? Because it can't lead us to some desired consequences anymore. I hope this point is understandable for you. Okay, at this point, I will show you a video clip, and here you will see a news coverage about a report published by World Economic Forum every year. Okay, World Economic Forum, I don't know if you know the meaning of that, but this is a summit that brings world leaders, world politicians, presidents, prime minister of important countries together in Davos, which is a small town in Switzerland. So they are doing some brainstormings, and every year they are publishing a report which is called World Risk Report. Okay, they indicate the biggest risks that are awaiting the global community. So we had this report again published at the beginning of this year, and we can watch it and learn what kind of risks will be important in the near future for us.
A state-based armed conflict singled out as the most pressing global risk for the year, reflecting an escalation in global geopolitical tensions. A new report by the World Economic Forum highlights misinformation, environmental crises, and societal polarization as major global threats. The report draws on surveys of more than 900 experts before ranking what they see as the most pressing risks for the year. Our armed conflict tops that list, rising from 8th place last year, followed by misinformation and extreme weather events. Perceived risk for all have intensified from 2024, misinformation and disinformation compounding the failure to provide any collective action, as threats to the environment, including loss in biodiversity, continue to rise. Experts stress that without urgent collaboration to rebuild trust and strengthen multilateral efforts, these interconnected crises could destabilize global systems further. And for more on this, Mirek Dusek, he's Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, joins us live from Geneva. Mr. Dusek, it's not just experts who have delivered that warning. You yourself have said global leaders must choose either collaborate or face compounding instability. The stakes have never been higher. Now, we've heard that on climate change, on managing tensions in trade and territory. What is in this report on risk that might actually change global leaders' minds and make them work together?
Thank you for having me. First of all, this is our 20th edition, so it's a big milestone for our work on global risks. And as is our tradition, this is going to be shaping the agenda at the annual meeting in Davos that's going to take place next week. Under the theme Collaboration for the Intelligent Age. So the Global Risks Report that we have published today is one part of a bigger input into the annual meeting in Davos next week, and hopefully useful to decision makers, also people around the world as they think about the future. But of course, it is with this prism of global risks. And you're right, based on the data that we gathered, particularly for the current landscape, which is the 2025 state-based armed conflict tops the ranking. Overall, the geopolitical, geoeconomic uncertainty is definitely very much on the agenda, and it's coming through the data. Of course, we are living, I think there is now widespread recognition that we have a more competitive international system when it comes to geoeconomic, geopolitical relations. We have a record number of conflicts.
Okay, I will stop here after that point. There are a lot of repetitions, but I think you were able to catch some keywords here. And this table you can see on your screen include some of these keywords. The biggest problems are, first of all, the state-based conflicts, right? Beck was talking about the rise of terrorism, but right now the problem is bigger, right? Terrorism is like a conflict between small group. It is, I'm not underestimating the troubles that we can have with terrorism, but state-based conflict is, I mean, it can initiate the Third World War, right? So it is something bigger, right? States conflicts are, if we are talking about that probability, we are really in trouble, okay? And then we have some ecological problems, right? Extreme weather, global warming, Earth system changes. These are the second big risks that we can face in the next 10 years, according to this report. And another thing is, these are our problems, and to solve these problems is using these words by the gentleman who prepared the report with a group of experts, right? The source of this problem is a competitive international environment, right? We are losing the trust among nations. There is a choice for the international community. We will either prefer to collaborate, or we will have huge instabilities in the world, right? So remember that we talked about these concepts, right? We talked about the importance of trust, collaboration. We talked about cooperation versus competition, right? So we were able to build this environment after Second World War. At least Bretton Woods system made the correct analysis to define the problems leading us to two big wars, right? And then it took to the center the goal of stability, and it concluded that to have stability economically and politically, we should create a more trustable, peaceful, and less competitive atmosphere, right? So roughly 80 years after Bretton Woods conference, it seems that we are losing these values, right? We are prioritizing our own narrow national targets, and we forget to collaborate with the other leaders, other nations to solve the problems which are collective in nature. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all about the world risk theory. And now in the next module, I will talk about the next theory on globalization, which will be the runaway world. Okay, let me stop this video and see you in the next module.